In the eyes of many of his contemporaries, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky was nothing more than a dreamer lost in fantasies too wild for the world of science. His writings about spaceships, rocket engines fueled by liquid propellants, and the colonization of the cosmos were dismissed as the ramblings of a provincial schoolteacher with little grasp of practical engineering. Journalists who occasionally stumbled upon his manuscripts mocked the absurdity of imagining humans leaving Earth, while colleagues in Moscow and Petersburg's science circles often shook their heads at the sheer impracticality of his cosmic visions. How could a nearly deaf man teaching in a small Russian town far from the epicenters of scientific power possibly claim to chart the road to the stars? At best, critics thought, he was amusing in his eccentricity. At worst, he was delusional. And yet, history would prove that behind the fragile frame of this self-taught teacher burned one of the boldest intellects humanity had ever produced, a mind that saw further into the heavens than any of his age dared to imagine. Konstantin Eduardovich Tsiolkovsky was born on the 17th of September, 1857, in the small village of Izhevskoye, deep within the Ryazan province of Russia. His father, a forester of modest means, and his mother of Polish descent, raised a large family amid the hard realities of rural 19th century life. Young Konstantin's world was shaped by poverty, isolation, and illness. At the age of 10, he contracted scarlet fever, a disease that permanently damaged his hearing. What began as a childhood misfortune hardened into a lifelong challenge, deafness that cut him off from teachers, friends, and the vibrant sound of the world. School became almost impossible as he could not follow lessons in crowded classrooms. He was forced to withdraw, retreating into a solitude where books became his true companions. It was in that silence that Tsiolkovsky's imagination began to bloom. He spent long hours in libraries, immersing himself in mathematics, physics, and mechanics. The works of Jules Verne in particular stirred his soul, for Verne had dared to suggest voyages beyond Earth's boundaries. But unlike most children who read Verne with wonder and then set the book aside, Konstantin asked himself with stubborn seriousness, could such a thing be possible? Could human beings, through science and engineering, actually build machines to cross the void of space? From these early readings, he developed the habit of transforming fantasy into hypotheses, hypotheses into calculations, and calculations into the seedbed of theories that would one day underpin astronautics. His family, often struggling to survive, could not afford to indulge his peculiar obsessions. His father despaired that his son, withdrawn and awkward in social exchanges due to his hearing loss, might never secure a stable livelihood. But Konstantin persisted. By sheer determination, he pursued self-education. He learned algebra, geometry, trigonometry, and physics largely on his own, sometimes seeking guidance from sympathetic tutors, often simply grinding away at problems until he unraveled them. Later in life, he would recall those long nights at a wooden table, lit by a faint lamp, surrounded by borrowed volumes, as the crucible in which his mind was forged. The deprivation that silenced his ears sharpened his inner world, forcing him to create structures of thought independent of the chatter of others. In 1873, at the age of 16, his father sent him to Moscow to study in hopes that the city might offer better opportunities. There, Konstantin spent 3 years in the great Chertkov Library, which became his true university. He devoured treatises on mathematics, astronomy, mechanics, and the new science of thermodynamics. Though he never received a formal degree, he absorbed knowledge with voracious intensity. The library's endless shelves were his professors, its silence his classroom. At times he lived in near destitution, eating little, wearing clothes worn thin, but he scarcely cared. For him, ideas were sustenance. His notebooks filled with sketches of flying machines, calculations of trajectories, musings on the possibility of using rockets to escape Earth's gravity. Even in these formative years, his thinking displayed the characteristic that would define his career: an unwillingness to accept the limits imposed by conventional wisdom. Others might study steam engines or the telegraph and dream of minor improvements to existing technology. Constantine dared to imagine entirely new realms of human endeavor. If gravity held men to Earth, then perhaps machines could be built to overcome gravity. If the atmosphere suffocated flight beyond a certain height, then perhaps propulsion could be designed to work in a vacuum. Where others saw barriers, he saw problems to be solved, often with mathematical precision. This audacity, born of isolation and nurtured in obscurity, became his intellectual hallmark. Yet bold ideas alone do not secure survival, and Tsiolkovsky soon needed employment. In 1879, he passed an examination that allowed him to work as a schoolteacher in mathematics. He took posts in provincial towns, most notably in Borovsk, where he lived for nearly 12 years. There, in a modest wooden house with his wife and children, he balanced the daily duties of instructing students with feverish private study. His neighbors often regarded him as an eccentric recluse, endlessly tinkering with mechanical models and writing incomprehensible manuscripts. Inside his cramped home laboratory, however, revolutionary ideas were taking shape. He began to sketch the outlines of airships, to explore the use of lighter-than-air designs, and to conduct experiments with aerodynamics. Though crude, these efforts marked the beginning of his systematic inquiries into flight. In 1881, he married Varvara Yevgrafovna Sokolova, the daughter of a local priest. Their marriage was steady, though sometimes strained by his obsessive devotion to study and the financial difficulties that plagued their household. Together they raised 7 children, and Varvara's patience provided him with the stability to continue his intellectual pursuits despite constant hardship. His family life, filled with both joy and tragedy, mirrored the struggles of many Russians in that turbulent era: scarcity, illness, and the relentless grind of provincial existence. Yet within that environment, Tsiolkovsky's mind soared to heights few could comprehend. During his years in Borovsk, he began publishing papers on mechanics and aeronautics. His early work on airships was recognized by the Russian Technical Society, earning him a modest reputation. But his true passion lay elsewhere in the mathematics of rocketry and the dream of space travel. By the 1,890 seconds, he was developing the conceptual framework that would culminate in his most famous contribution, the rocket equation. He reasoned that if a machine expelled mass in one direction at high speed, it would propel itself in the opposite direction. Using the conservation of momentum, he derived the relationship between the change in velocity of a rocket, the velocity of its exhaust gases, and the ratio of its initial to final mass. This simple but profound equation, published in 1903, remains the cornerstone of astronautics to this day. At first, almost no one paid attention. His paper, The Exploration of Cosmic Space by Means of Reactive Devices, appeared in a small Russian aviation journal with limited circulation. Critics scoffed at its impracticality. Rockets, they argued, were toys, fireworks at best, dangerous curiosities at worst. To imagine such devices carrying men into space seemed ludicrous. Tsiolkovsky endured ridicule and neglect, yet he persisted. He filled notebooks with elaborate designs of multi-stage rockets, space stations, and orbital habitats. He calculated the benefits of liquid propellants over solid powders, decades before such concepts would be tested. He envisioned greenhouses in space, solar power, and human colonization of the solar system. What others dismissed as fantasy, he pursued with unrelenting logic. Despite his near-deafness, Tsiolkovsky occasionally corresponded with other scientists. Some recognized his brilliance, though few embraced his cosmic vision fully. The Russian Academy of Sciences acknowledged certain of his contributions to aeronautics, but largely ignored his rocketry theories. Financially, he remained precarious, often relying solely on his modest teacher's salary. The contrast between the grandeur of his intellectual pursuits and the humility of his daily circumstances was striking. Here was a man who dreamed of galaxies while patching shoes for his children, who calculated the trajectories of interplanetary voyages while worrying about firewood for the winter. The disparity did not deter him. If anything, it steeled his resolve. His resilience owed much to his philosophical outlook. Deeply influenced by Russian Cosmism, a philosophical movement blending science, spirituality, and a belief in humanity's cosmic destiny, Tsiolkovsky regarded the pursuit of spaceflight not merely as a technical challenge, but as a moral imperative. He believed humanity was destined to spread beyond Earth, to colonize the universe, and thereby ensure the immortality of life itself. For him, rockets were not just machines, they were the vehicles of human evolution, the instruments by which mankind would fulfill its destiny as a cosmic species. Such convictions gave him strength against the tide of indifference and ridicule that accompanied his life's work. As the new century dawned, Tsiolkovsky was entering a period of both personal hardship and intellectual flowering. The Russia of 1900 was convulsed by social unrest, poverty, and the first rumblings of revolution. In provincial Kaluga, where he had relocated after his years in Borovsk, Tsiolkovsky continued his humble existence as a mathematics teacher. His deafness isolated him from colleagues. His lack of formal academic credentials barred him from the corridors of power in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and his unorthodox interests left him a target of mockery. Yet within the walls of his modest wooden house, his imagination blazed ever more fiercely. He worked with the tenacity of a man convinced that his destiny lay not in social approval, but in the silent dialogue between his mind and the stars. Kaluga, a quiet town on the Oka River, became both his exile and his sanctuary. The townspeople regarded him as a curious oddity, a gaunt figure with a long beard, forever scribbling calculations or tinkering with strange contraptions. Children sometimes laughed at him. Adults dismissed him as eccentric, but none could see the universe unfolding inside his notebook. Day after day, he refined his rocket calculations, envisioning not only the mechanics of launch, but the long-term survival of humanity beyond Earth. He considered problems of closed ecological systems, suggesting the use of plants in space habitats to recycle air and provide food. He calculated the requirements for orbital velocity, analyzed the potential of multi-stage rockets, and even speculated on space stations rotating to create artificial gravity. Each idea, carefully grounded in mathematics, anticipated the realities of 20th century astronautics. His 1903 paper had been largely ignored, but Tsiolkovsky did not relent. He produced manuscript after manuscript, often publishing at his own expense in obscure local presses. Few read them, fewer still understood them, yet he persisted because for him the act of writing was an act of faith in the future. "The earth," he wrote in one of his most famous lines, "is the cradle of humanity, but mankind cannot remain in the cradle forever." To most of his contemporaries, this sounded like a poet's fancy. To him, it was a statement of scientific inevitability. He believed that evolution demanded expansion, that intelligence itself was destined to spread across the cosmos. Rockets were simply the tools that nature had hidden in the mind of man, waiting to be discovered. At times, his poverty grew acute. He repaired his own shoes, patched clothing for his children, and survived on meager rations. When financial crises struck, he pawned possessions or sought small grants from local institutions. Despite these struggles, he refused to abandon his vision. His wife, long accustomed to his obsessions, supported him as best she could, though the weight of his dreams often strained their household. His children alternated between pride in their father's brilliance and frustration at the hardships his relentless work imposed. Yet even in family turmoil, he clung to the conviction that his ideas were not for his contemporaries, but for generations yet unborn. During the 1,910 seconds as Russia hurtled toward war and revolution, Tsiolkovsky deepened his philosophical reflections. His writings fused science with cosmic destiny. He spoke of humanity's future in the universe as a process of spiritual as well as physical expansion. He imagined not only rockets and stations, but also the eventual transformation of human beings themselves into beings of greater intelligence, longer lifespan, even into forms that might adapt to cosmic environments. His vision was evolutionary in the grandest sense, life through human reason becoming a cosmic force. This synthesis of engineering calculation and metaphysical speculation placed him at the heart of the Russian cosmism movement, alongside thinkers like Nikolai Fedorov. For Tsiolkovsky, science was not cold mechanics, it was the pathway to immortality. World War I and the Russian Revolution of 1917 shook his country to its foundations. Kaluga, far from the front lines, was spared the worst violence, but the upheaval affected everyone. Amid scarcity and uncertainty, Tsiolkovsky continued to write, often addressing letters to the new Soviet authorities, offering his ideas for airships, rockets, and new technologies. At first he was ignored, just as he had been under the Tsar. But gradually, in the 1,920 seconds, the Soviet state began to take interest. The new regime valued science and technology as symbols of progress, and Tsiolkovsky's cosmic visions, once derided as fantasies, began to resonate with the utopian spirit of the time. His reputation slowly shifted from eccentric dreamer to visionary pioneer. By the early 1,920 seconds, he was recognized by younger engineers who would one day form the backbone of the Soviet rocketry program. Young enthusiasts visited him in Kaluga seeking guidance and inspiration. Among them were future leaders of Soviet astronautics, who revered him as a mentor. They listened to his ideas about multi-stage rockets, liquid propellants, and orbital mechanics, and though they often had to reinterpret his theories in practical terms, they acknowledged him as the intellectual father of their field. For the first time in his life, Tsiolkovsky experienced genuine admiration from a scientific community, albeit a small one. Recognition came late, but not too late. In 1921, the Soviet government granted him a modest pension, freeing him from the constant struggle to survive. He was able to devote more of his time to writing and correspondence, producing essays that ranged from technical descriptions of rocket design to speculative visions of interstellar travel. He became something of a cult figure, celebrated in certain circles as a prophet of spaceflight. The press occasionally interviewed him, presenting him as a wise elder who had dreamed of rockets long before others. Though his hearing remained impaired and his health sometimes frail, he relished this late flowering of respect. The breadth of his imagination during these years was extraordinary. He described rockets leaving Earth and assembling in orbit, constructing massive stations that would serve as waypoints for journeys to the Moon, Mars, and beyond. He considered the challenges of long duration, spaceflight radiation, psychological strain, the need for closed ecosystems, and offered solutions grounded in science. He envisioned enormous orbital greenhouses, powered by solar energy, sustaining thousands of inhabitants. He even speculated about asteroid mining and the eventual colonization of the galaxy. These ideas, set down in the 1,920 seconds, would become practical goals for space agencies a century later. To his contemporaries, they seemed almost magical. To him, they were the logical extrapolation of physical law and human ingenuity. Despite growing recognition, ridicule never entirely disappeared. Some Soviet officials regarded him as an old eccentric whose usefulness lay more in propaganda than in practical engineering. Journalists sometimes exaggerated his pronouncements, portraying him as a mystical sage rather than a rigorous thinker. But Tsiolkovsky accepted these distortions with equanimity. He had endured decades of scorn. Now, even partial acknowledgment felt like vindication. He often said that he cared little for personal fame. What mattered was that humanity one day would reach the stars. If his name was remembered in that achievement, so be it. If not, he was content simply to have pointed the way. By the late 1920 seconds and early 1930 seconds, a new generation of Soviet engineers was actively experimenting with rockets, and they looked to Tsiolkovsky as their intellectual forerunner. Organizations like GERD, Group for the Study of Reactive Motion, and later the Jet Propulsion Research Institute, began translating some of his concepts into practice. Though he was too old and frail to participate directly, his writings circulated among them, inspiring their efforts. He followed their progress with keen interest, delighting in each small step that validated his theories. In this period, he also wrote autobiographical reflections, recounting his childhood, his struggles with deafness, his years of neglect, and his lifelong dream of spaceflight. These writings reveal a man who, despite hardship, never lost faith in the power of reason and imagination. The final years of his life were a mixture of satisfaction and suffering. He endured personal losses, including the deaths of family members, and his health declined. Yet he also witnessed the first real rocket launches in the Soviet Union, primitive though they were, and knew that the path he had charted was being followed. When he died on the 19th of September 1935, at the age of 78, the Soviet state honored him with public recognition, hailing him as a pioneer of astronautics. Streets were named after him, monuments erected, and his works republished. In death, he achieved the fame that had eluded him in much of his life. But his true monument was not of stone or metal. It was the trajectory of human destiny. Within a generation of his passing, satellites would orbit Earth, rockets would carry men into space, and footprints would be pressed into the dust of the moon. Each of these milestones bore the imprint of his mind, for they all relied upon the principles he had articulated in solitude decades earlier. The rocket equation, the concept of multi-stage launch, the vision of space stations, all were seeds he had planted, nurtured by others, into the mighty tree of astronautics. The world that once mocked him had become the world he foretold. His legacy today is inseparable from the very notion of space exploration. Without Tsiolkovsky, the Soviet Union's space program would have lacked its philosophical foundation, and the global race to the stars might have taken a different course. Yet his influence extends beyond engineering. He remains a symbol of the power of imagination, of the triumph of vision over ridicule, of the solitary thinker who dares to dream beyond the horizon. His life demonstrates that genius can flourish in the most unlikely places, that a deaf schoolteacher in a provincial town can lay the intellectual groundwork for humanity's journey into the cosmos. Though Tsiolkovsky's earthly life ended in 1935, the momentum of his thought did not. His writings, scattered in journals, self-published booklets, and stacks of notebooks, remained a treasure chest for those who sought them. For decades, he had been a solitary prophet. But now, in the charged atmosphere of Soviet ambition, his theories became a wellspring of inspiration. Engineers, dreamers, and political leaders alike began to discover that the eccentric schoolteacher from Kaluga had provided a roadmap for the future. What had once seemed lunacy now read like prophecy. And in that transformation lay one of the most astonishing vindications in the history of science. The details of his technical work, so easily dismissed in his lifetime, were in fact rigorous and far-sighted. The rocket equation he formulated described with elegant precision how a vehicle's velocity increased as it expelled propellant. This simple mathematical relationship became the key to all future calculations of launch systems. It showed that the velocity change achievable by a rocket depended not only on the exhaust velocity of the gases, but also on the ratio of initial to final mass. From this, the concept of staging followed naturally. No single rocket, limited by the constraints of propellant mass and structural weight, could reach the tremendous speeds required to escape Earth's gravity. But if a rocket could shed parts of itself as it rose, each stage igniting and then falling away, the total system could achieve what no single unit could. In his notebooks, Tsiolkovsky drew diagrams of such multi-stage rockets, anticipating designs that would later carry Sputnik, Gagarin, and Apollo astronauts skyward. He also delved into the possibilities of liquid propellants at a time when almost everyone considered only gunpowder rockets. He calculated that hydrogen and oxygen, when liquefied and combined, offered energy far superior to solid fuels. In the vacuum of space, where combustion was difficult to sustain, liquid propellants with controlled pumps and nozzles could provide steady thrust. These insights, recorded decades before the technology to realize them existed, reveal the depth of his intuition. He was not merely dreaming, he was reasoning rigorously from physics toward practical engineering, even if the means to build such devices lay far beyond the resources of his era. Beyond propulsion, he explored the concept of life support. He considered the need for closed ecological systems in spacecraft, with plants producing oxygen and recycling waste. He envisioned large orbital habitats rotating to simulate gravity through centrifugal force, where communities of humans might live and work indefinitely. His essays describe families in space, children growing up among the stars, laboratories orbiting planets, and factories extracting resources from asteroids. These ideas, astonishing in their scope, were not casual fantasies. They were detailed scenarios built from the logical extension of physical law. He asked, if energy from the sun can be harnessed, why not use it in orbit where it shines without interruption? If plants can recycle air and water on Earth, why not arrange them in space habitats? His mind leapt ahead, bridging imagination with analysis. In the Soviet Union of the 1,930 seconds, such visions carried ideological resonance. The state was obsessed with industrial progress, with demonstrating the superiority of socialism through scientific achievement. Tsiolkovsky's cosmic dreams aligned with the rhetoric of boundless possibility. Propagandists portrayed him as a visionary elder, proof that Russia had produced minds equal to any in the West. Photographs of him in his simple Kaluga study appeared in magazines. His quotations were recited to school children, and his name became associated with the inevitable march of human progress toward the stars. Yet beneath the propaganda lay genuine respect among scientists. They knew that his calculations were sound, his ideas fertile, his vision indispensable. Even as the state used him as a symbol, the younger generation of engineers mined his works for technical guidance. Among those deeply influenced was Sergei Korolev, who would later become the chief architect of the Soviet space program. As a young man, Korolev studied Tsiolkovsky's writings with reverence. He and his colleagues in the group for the study of reactive motion regarded the elder thinker as their intellectual father. They corresponded with him, visited him, and drew strength from his example. Tsiolkovsky, in turn, encouraged them, telling them that the era of practical rocketry had come and that they were the ones to carry forward his torch. The continuity between his theoretical speculations and their experimental work established the lineage that led directly from Kaluga's modest cottage to Baikonur's launch pads. Meanwhile, his philosophical writings continued to expand. He argued that the exploration of space was not merely a technical endeavor, but a moral duty. Humanity, he said, had outgrown Earth. To remain confined to the planet was to stagnate, to risk extinction through natural disaster, war, or environmental collapse. Expansion into space was the only way to secure the long-term survival of intelligence. He saw this as the natural continuation of evolution from the sea to the land, from the land to the sky, and now from the sky to the cosmos. Each step represented a liberation from constraints, a broadening of horizons. Rockets were not just machines, they were instruments of destiny. In his cosmism, he envisioned a future where humanity would merge with the cosmos itself. He speculated about advanced beings, perhaps once human, who had transcended physical form, living as pure energy or consciousness. He suggested that evolution might lead to immortality, not through mystical means, but through scientific advancement. Genetic engineering, life extension, the harnessing of cosmic energy, all these, he believed, lay within humanity's eventual grasp. To modern readers, such passages may sound more like science fiction than science, yet they reflect his belief in the boundless potential of reason. He did not distinguish sharply between what was possible tomorrow and what might be possible in millennia. For him, the trajectory of science pointed unerringly outward, upward, onward. The paradox of his life was stark. While his mind soared to interstellar distances, his body remained confined in a provincial town, enduring shortages, illness, and neglect. While he wrote of artificial gravity and orbital colonies, he worried about firewood for winter. While he sketched rockets capable of carrying humanity to Mars, he patched the shoes of his children. This tension between cosmic vision and earthly poverty has become part of the myth of Tsiolkovsky, a reminder that genius often flourishes in unlikely soil. His beard, his spectacles, his modest home, filled with papers and models, all became icons of the solitary prophet. Visitors to Kaluga in his later years recalled the contrast between his humble surroundings and the grandeur of his thoughts. They sat in cramped rooms while he spoke of galaxies. They saw worn furniture, but heard of futures where humanity spanned the stars. Even after his death, his reputation grew. The Soviet Union elevated him into a pantheon of national heroes. Statues were erected, his writings collected, and his anniversaries celebrated. Schools and streets bore his name. The crater Tsiolkovsky on the far side of the moon was christened in his honor, a fitting tribute to the man who had first shown how to reach it. Yet even beyond official commemoration, his influence permeated the culture of space exploration worldwide. Western scientists, once dismissive, came to acknowledge his role. Hermann Oberth, Robert Goddard, Wernher von Braun all recognized that Tsiolkovsky's work paralleled their own, and in some respects anticipated it. Though he had labored in isolation, he had been part of a global awakening, the moment when humanity first realized that the stars were within reach. The depth of his legacy cannot be measured solely in equations or designs. It resides also in the courage to imagine. Tsiolkovsky demonstrated that vision is as essential as calculation, that daring to ask "what if" can be as transformative as proving "how to." He lived through mockery, neglect, and hardship, yet he refused to relinquish his belief in humanity's cosmic future. In doing so, he provided not only the technical foundation of astronautics, but also its moral compass. Every launch, every satellite, every astronaut owes something to that belief. When humanity looks outward, it looks through eyes that he helped to open. As the Soviet Union accelerated its drive toward modernization in the 1,930 seconds, Tsiolkovsky's image was carefully woven into the narrative of progress. Newspapers carried stories of the grandfather of rocketry, school children memorized his aphorisms, and local officials in Kaluga boasted of their town's unusual resident. Yet behind the public image lay a man still bound to his daily routines, waking early, reading by the small window of his house, writing endlessly in his notebooks, and tinkering with small mechanical models made from scraps of wood and metal. He remained faithful to simplicity, for his real treasures were the equations and ideas filling his pages. He sometimes remarked that wealth or luxury would have been meaningless distractions. What mattered was that his mind remained sharp, directed always toward the stars. Visitors who came to Kaluga in those years often left with the impression of having encountered not merely a scientist, but a sage. They described his intense gaze, the way he would pause before speaking, as if measuring each word against the infinite backdrop of the universe. He would lead them through his study, where stacks of papers and crude models filled every corner. He showed them diagrams of rockets and rotating habitats, spoke of humanity's duty to colonize the cosmos, and explained his conviction that the survival of intelligence depended on expansion beyond Earth. Many left inspired, their skepticism dissolved by the force of his conviction. Others remained doubtful, thinking him a dreamer too far removed from practical reality. But none left unmoved, for his presence radiated a rare blend of humility and grandeur. The world outside Kaluga, however, was anything but peaceful. Stalin's regime tightened its grip, industrialization drove millions into exhausting labor, and the threat of war loomed once again. Amid this turmoil, Tsiolkovsky continued to receive letters from young enthusiasts. Some were engineers experimenting with small rockets, others were students entranced by his visions. He responded faithfully, encouraging them, urging them never to abandon their dreams despite obstacles. His correspondence reveals a man deeply aware of his role as a bridge between generations. He could not build the machines himself. His health, his resources, his circumstances prevented it. But he could plant the ideas in minds young enough to realize them. In that sense, he saw himself as sowing seeds for a harvest he would never live to see. His writings from the early 1930 seconds became increasingly expansive. He speculated about humanity's distant future, envisioning interstellar travel, the transformation of the human body through scientific means, and the eventual spread of life throughout the galaxy. He argued that intelligence was not an accident, but the universe's way of knowing itself, and that to fulfill this cosmic role, humans must transcend their planetary cradle. He imagined civilizations exchanging knowledge across the stars, united by science and reason. To some readers, these essays bordered on mystical speculation, but to him they were the logical extension of natural law. He insisted that everything he wrote was rooted in physics, biology, and mathematics, even when it reached into the farthest horizons of imagination. Meanwhile, his technical contributions were gradually seeping into wider awareness. Soviet engineers studying rocketry found in his works not just inspiration, but practical guidance. His analyses of nozzle design, propellant efficiency, and the mechanics of staging informed their experiments. Though they often had to refine or adapt his ideas, the underlying principles proved invaluable. They recognized that the old teacher from Kaluga had already charted much of the path they sought to travel. His influence was subtle but pervasive, a foundation upon which their own work rested. Outside Russia, knowledge of Tsiolkovsky's work spread slowly. Language barriers, political isolation, and the obscurity of his early publications limited his recognition in Europe and America. Yet, as Western scientists began to hear of Soviet rocketry efforts, they encountered references to the Russian pioneer whose equations paralleled those of Goddard and Oberth. Eventually, translations of his papers revealed the depth of his insight. Though he had labored in isolation, he was part of a global movement, a convergence of minds across continents who, often without knowing of each other, were laying the foundations of spaceflight. In retrospect, historians would marvel at the simultaneity. Goddard in America, Oberth in Germany, Tsiolkovsky in Russia, each advancing rocketry in his own way, each derided in his own time, each vindicated by history. The irony of Tsiolkovsky's life was that his most profound contributions received little recognition until he was an old man, and even then often cloaked in propaganda. The Soviet state celebrated him because he symbolized the union of Russian genius and socialist destiny. Yet he himself remained detached from politics. His allegiance was to the cosmos, not to parties or regimes. He accepted the honors, the modest pension, the attention, but his writings reveal little enthusiasm for ideology. What animated him was the vision of humanity's expansion into space. He saw political systems as temporary, but the cosmos as eternal. To tie his work too closely to any regime would have seemed trivial compared to the immensity of his cosmic mission. Still, he was not ungrateful. He expressed appreciation for the pension that allowed him to focus more fully on his work in his final years. He welcomed the young visitors who came to honor him. He even allowed his image to be used in publications that portrayed him as a national treasure. Perhaps he recognized that this attention, whatever its motives, helped secure his legacy and ensured that his ideas would not vanish into obscurity. If propaganda was the price of preservation, he was willing to pay it. What mattered was that the dream of spaceflight reached as many minds as possible. His death in 1935 was marked by public ceremonies, newspaper tributes, and official recognition. The man, once mocked as a provincial eccentric, was buried as a hero of science. Yet even in death, the paradox remained. He had built no rockets, launched no spacecraft, commanded no laboratories. His tools were paper and ink, his workshop a humble study, his audience for most of his life non-existent. And yet from these meager materials he had constructed the theoretical architecture of the space age. Engineers would later say that they stood on his shoulders. Philosophers would say that he expanded the horizon of human destiny. The truth is that both were correct. In the decades that followed, as rockets thundered into the sky and humanity took its first tentative steps into orbit, his name was invoked repeatedly. Soviet cosmonauts carried portraits of him, engineers cited his equations, and school textbooks described him as the father of astronautics. The crater on the far side of the moon bearing his name became a silent monument to his foresight. International conferences on space exploration paid tribute to him. His image appeared on stamps, coins, and posters. What had once been ridiculed as fantasy was now institutionalized as history. Yet the essence of his legacy lies not in monuments or honors, but in the ongoing quest for the stars. Each time a rocket launches, each time a probe reaches a distant planet, each time humanity contemplates life beyond Earth, the spirit of Tsiolkovsky is present. His insistence that humanity is destined for the cosmos continues to inspire. His life reminds us that great ideas can arise from the most unlikely circumstances, that poverty and disability are no barriers to genius, and that the ridicule of contemporaries is no verdict on truth. In the end, the nearly deaf schoolteacher from Kaluga proved that the universe listens not to mockery, but to mathematics, not to laughter, but to vision. In the years after Tsiolkovsky's passing, the Soviet Union entered an era of rapid technological militarization. Rockets, once dismissed as fantasies, became instruments of war. Engineers like Sergei Korolev and Valentin Glushko advanced from experimental laboratories to state-funded institutes, transforming theory into practice. As their designs evolved, they often cited the old master from Kaluga as the philosophical father of their efforts. His notebooks, preserved and studied, offered a reservoir of ideas. Though some of his technical details required revision, the underlying concepts proved indispensable. The idea of multi-stage rockets, the use of liquid propellants, and the notion of orbital construction all traced their lineage to the man who had once written in obscurity. The contrast was striking. What had been mockery in 1903 became state doctrine by the 1950 seconds. Beyond the Soviet Union, Tsiolkovsky's reputation grew as well. When Western observers marveled at Sputnik in 1957, they sought to understand the intellectual heritage behind such a feat. They discovered Tsiolkovsky's name, his equations, his essays. Translations of his work appeared in English, French, and German, revealing to a global audience that the foundations of astronautics had been laid decades earlier by a solitary Russian teacher. Historians of science began to rank him alongside Goddard and Oberth as one of the triumvirate of rocketry pioneers. In time, some even argued that his role was the most visionary, for while Goddard had built small rockets and Oberth had published practical designs, Tsiolkovsky had encompassed not only propulsion, but also the philosophical justification for space exploration. He had not merely asked how rockets might fly, but why humanity must build them. His cosmism set him apart. For him, rockets were not ends in themselves, but means to a cosmic purpose. He regarded humanity as a transitional species, destined to evolve into higher forms through science. He envisioned future generations adapting to space through biological modifications, technological augmentation, and perhaps even the abandonment of physical form. In his essays, he speculated about beings of pure energy traveling between stars, about consciousness expanding across the universe. Though such visions exceeded the practical scope of 20th century astronautics, they infused the field with a sense of grandeur. Engineers building rockets in workshops could see themselves not merely as technicians, but as participants in humanity's cosmic destiny. This fusion of science and philosophy distinguished Tsiolkovsky from his contemporaries and ensured that his influence would endure far beyond technical manuals. The Cold War space race, ironically, vindicated many of his pronouncements. When Yuri Gagarin orbited Earth in 1961, the Soviet press invoked Tsiolkovsky's famous phrase, "The Earth is the cradle of humanity, but one cannot remain in the cradle forever." The world saw in Gagarin's smile the realization of a dream first articulated in a provincial Russian town decades earlier. Space stations followed, satellites proliferated, and probes ventured toward other planets, all confirming the trajectory he had imagined. Each milestone echoed his conviction that humanity's expansion into space was inevitable. His name became a symbol not only of Soviet pride, but also of the universal human aspiration to explore. Yet it is worth remembering how fragile his path had been. His deafness might have consigned him to obscurity. His poverty might have silenced his writings. His contemporaries' ridicule might have broken his resolve. That he persisted despite these obstacles is as much a part of his legacy as his equations. His life stands as a testament to resilience, to the power of solitary conviction. In a world where recognition often depends on institutions, patronage, and networks, he demonstrated that sheer perseverance can carve a path into history. He wrote for decades without audience, convinced that truth itself would one day provide its own vindication. That vindication came not in his lifetime, but in the rockets that shook the skies a generation later. In the broader history of ideas, Tsiolkovsky represents the archetype of the visionary outsider. Like Mendel in genetics or Boltzmann in thermodynamics, he labored in obscurity, dismissed by contemporaries, only to be recognized posthumously as a founder of a discipline. His story raises questions about how societies recognize genius, about the thin line between eccentricity and brilliance. For decades, he was a deaf teacher in a provincial town, scribbling fantasies. Today, he is remembered as the father of astronautics. The transformation from ridicule to reverence underscores the unpredictable dynamics of intellectual history. It reminds us that truth often arrives clothed in forms the present cannot recognize. The technical community continues to honor his contributions. Engineers still use the rocket equation that bears his name. Space agencies refer to his writings on staging, propulsion, and orbital habitats. Philosophers of technology cite his cosmism as an early articulation of transhumanist thought. Cultural historians analyze his fusion of science and spirituality as a uniquely Russian contribution to modernity. In Kaluga, his modest house has become a museum, visited by thousands who seek to glimpse the birthplace of cosmic dreams. His study, preserved with papers and models, allows visitors to feel the presence of the man who once imagined humanity's leap to the stars. Yet his significance extends beyond Russia. Internationally, he embodies the universality of human imagination. His life demonstrates that the impulse to reach beyond Earth is not confined to any one nation or ideology. It arises from the human condition itself, the restless desire to explore, to transcend limits, to ask what lies beyond the horizon. In this sense, Tsiolkovsky belongs not only to Russia or to the Soviet Union, but to all of humanity. His vision was planetary, even cosmic, and his legacy reflects that breadth. Even today, as space exploration enters new phases with private companies, international collaborations, and visions of Mars colonization, his words retain their resonance. When Elon Musk speaks of making humanity a multiplanetary species, when scientists discuss building closed ecological systems on Mars, when planners envision orbital greenhouses and solar power stations, they echo Tsiolkovsky. A century after his lonely nights in Kaluga, his visions remain blueprints for the future. The technologies have advanced, the contexts have changed, but the underlying conviction that humanity must not remain confined to Earth remains as urgent as ever. In reflecting on Tsiolkovsky's legacy, one is struck by the unity of his life and thought. His deafness, which cut him off from the noise of society, drove him inward, where imagination could flourish. His poverty, which denied him resources, forced him to rely on intellect rather than apparatus. His isolation, which deprived him of colleagues, freed him from conformity. Each hardship, transmuted by resilience, became a source of strength. The very obstacles that might have silenced another became, in his case, the conditions of genius. Out of silence, he gave humanity a voice that spoke to the stars. By the time the 20th century reached its midpoint, the world had become a stage on which Tsiolkovsky's predictions played out almost exactly as he had foreseen. Rockets, once derided as toys or fireworks, had become the most formidable symbols of national power. In the aftermath of World War II, both the United States and the Soviet Union recognized that control of rocketry meant control of the future. Ballistic missiles carried the specter of nuclear annihilation. Satellites carried the promise of global communication and surveillance. In both cases, the foundations were those laid by the deaf teacher of Kaluga. His rocket equation governed not only the trajectories of exploration, but also the arcs of weapons. In this duality lay one of the darker paradoxes of his legacy. The same principles that could lift humanity to the stars could also destroy cities in an instant. Soviet engineers acknowledged this tension even as they advanced their designs. They revered Tsiolkovsky as the father of peaceful exploration, but they knew their laboratories were funded by military imperatives. Korolev, who had endured imprisonment in Stalin's camps before rising to become chief designer, often reminded his colleagues that their work carried both glory and peril. He kept Tsiolkovsky's words alive, speaking of humanity's destiny in space, even while directing projects for missiles capable of carrying warheads across continents. The irony was not lost on him, nor on others. Tsiolkovsky's cosmic idealism had become entwined with the grim realities of geopolitics, yet even in this distortion, his influence remained undeniable. Without his vision, the very idea of space conquest might have lacked coherence. His dream of reaching beyond Earth provided the ideological justification that allowed the Soviet state to pour resources into rocketry. When Sputnik was launched in October 1957, the event was hailed as the dawn of a new era. Newspapers around the world carried images of the small satellite, its beeps echoing across the globe. In Moscow, celebrations included quotations from Tsiolkovsky affirming that the dream of the Kaluga teacher had come true. For the Soviet Union, it was not only a technological triumph, but also a cultural vindication. They could claim that the man who had first articulated the path to space had been Russian, that his ideas had matured under socialism, that his legacy now bore fruit. The propaganda machine exalted him as a symbol of national genius, yet behind the slogans lay truth. Sputnik did indeed fulfill his predictions. It orbited Earth exactly as he had described, half a century earlier, proof that his vision was rooted not in fantasy, but in physics. The following years brought more milestones. Gagarin's flight in 1961, the construction of space stations, robotic missions to the moon and planets. Each step echoed his writings. When Gagarin returned from orbit, he quoted Tsiolkovsky's famous line about humanity not remaining in the cradle. The words captured the imagination of millions, encapsulating the leap from Earth into space. For many, Tsiolkovsky's name became inseparable from that phrase, as though his entire legacy were distilled into it. But behind the aphorism lay decades of patient thought, countless calculations, and a philosophy that bound engineering to destiny. The world may have known only the quotation, but the engineers knew the depth of the mind that produced it. In the West, recognition of Tsiolkovsky's role grew gradually. Scholars translated his works, engineers acknowledged his precedents, and historians placed him alongside Goddard and Oberth. In academic circles, debates arose over who deserved the title of Father of Astronautics. Some argued for Goddard's practical experiments, others for Oberth's systematic designs, but many conceded that Tsiolkovsky's comprehensive vision encompassed both. He had not built rockets, but he had conceived the framework within which all rockets must operate. He had not launched satellites, but he had described their orbits with precision. He had not flown to the moon, but he had shown mathematically that such journeys were possible. In the end, recognition settled on a trinity: Goddard, Oberth, and Tsiolkovsky. But among them, Tsiolkovsky alone had fused science with philosophy, calculation with cosmic destiny. Culturally, his influence extended into literature, art, and film. Soviet science fiction often invoked his name, portraying him as a prophet whose visions of space colonization anticipated the adventures of future generations. Writers such as Alexander Belyaev wove his ideas into narratives of interplanetary travel. Artists painted murals of rockets and space stations, often inscribing Tsiolkovsky's quotations beside them. In cinema, early Soviet films about spaceflight portrayed him as the wise elder whose dreams inspired heroic cosmonauts. These cultural representations reinforced his status as a national icon, but they also spread his ideas to the broader public. Millions who never opened a scientific journal nonetheless absorbed his conviction that humanity's destiny lay among the stars. Philosophers, too, grappled with his cosmism. Some criticized it as naive utopianism, a blend of mysticism and science. Others praised it as a bold attempt to integrate human evolution into a cosmic framework. His belief that life must spread beyond Earth resonated with later thinkers concerned about existential risks and the long-term survival of intelligence. In the 21st century, scholars of transhumanism and astrobiology still cite him as a precursor, noting how his essays anticipated debates about life extension, space colonization, and the future of consciousness. In this sense, his legacy transcends astronautics, reaching into the broader discourse on humanity's place in the universe. Meanwhile, his hometown of Kaluga transformed into a site of pilgrimage. The modest house where he had lived became a museum, carefully preserved with his belongings and manuscripts. Visitors walked through the rooms where he had written by lamplight, saw the models he had built from wood and tin, and felt the presence of the man who had dreamed of space in obscurity. In 1967, a massive Tsiolkovsky State Museum of the History of Cosmonautics opened in Kaluga, housing rockets, spacecraft, and exhibitions devoted to his life. It became one of the largest space museums in the world, a testament to his enduring importance. School children visited in droves, learning that the path to space had begun not in laboratories, but in the mind of a solitary teacher. As decades passed, his reputation continued to evolve. With the fall of the Soviet Union, his image was freed from propaganda and rediscovered in a global context. Russian scholars emphasized his technical contributions. Western historians highlighted his philosophical vision, and together they painted a portrait of a thinker whose reach extended far beyond his time. Today, his works are studied not only by aerospace engineers, but also by philosophers, futurists, and cultural historians. His life serves as a case study in how ideas once scorned can become foundations of progress, how the solitary imagination can reshape the destiny of a species. The paradox of Tsiolkovsky's story remains compelling. He never left Russia, never traveled widely, never attended elite universities, never held powerful positions. He lived in modest poverty, isolated by deafness, burdened by family struggles, and yet he conceived humanity's future with clarity unmatched by his contemporaries. His life suggests that genius does not require privilege, that vision can flourish in unlikely places. It also suggests that ridicule is often the companion of innovation, that the laughter of the present is no measure of truth. In the silence of his study, with only books and calculations, he mapped the path to the stars. His ideas continue to resonate because they address not only the technical possibility of spaceflight, but also its necessity. In an age of climate change, nuclear threat, and environmental fragility, his insistence that humanity must spread beyond Earth feels prescient. He argued that survival demanded expansion, that life confined to one planet was vulnerable. Modern scientists echo his warning when they speak of extinction-level events, asteroid impacts, or ecological collapse. The rationale for colonizing other planets, once dismissed as fantasy, has become part of serious scientific and political discourse. In this, Tsiolkovsky's voice remains alive, urging us to see beyond immediate concerns toward the horizon of millennia. By the time the Apollo astronauts set foot on the moon in 1969, the vision of Tsiolkovsky had crossed boundaries of nation and ideology. Though the Soviet Union and the United States were locked in fierce rivalry, both relied on principles he had articulated. The Saturn V that carried Neil Armstrong to the lunar surface embodied staging, propellant ratios, and trajectories derived from the very equations he had formulated decades earlier. On the other side of the Iron Curtain, Soviet N-1 rockets attempted the same, echoing his designs for multi-stage structures capable of lifting heavy payloads beyond Earth. To engineers, the lineage was clear. Each launch was a continuation of the silent calculations in Kaluga. To philosophers, the moment symbolized humanity's first steps beyond the cradle he had described. His words, once obscure, now rang across the world as millions looked skyward at the moon and saw humanity's destiny unfolding. The irony was that his own country did not reach the moon first, yet his reputation did not diminish. In Russia, Tsiolkovsky remained the prophet of spaceflight, revered regardless of geopolitical outcomes. His image was invoked not merely for national pride, but for the universal nature of his vision. Even in the West, scholars acknowledged that the intellectual framework of astronautics owed much to him. The moon landing was not only an American achievement, it was the vindication of a global intellectual tradition in which Tsiolkovsky stood as one of the earliest and boldest voices. As space exploration advanced into the era of long-duration stations, robotic missions, and planetary probes, his writings acquired renewed relevance. His essays on orbital habitats anticipated the design of stations like Salyut, Mir, and the International Space Station. He had described rotating habitats to simulate gravity, ecosystems to recycle air and water, and greenhouses to provide food concepts mirrored in modern life support research. His vision of humanity living permanently in orbit, working and thriving beyond Earth, resonated with the reality of astronauts spending months aboard stations circling the planet. Each photograph of Earth from space, each report of scientific experiments conducted in zero gravity echoed his conviction that the cosmos was humanity's rightful domain. Futurists and philosophers found in him a precursor to modern discussions about transhumanism and the future of intelligence. His belief that humanity would evolve into higher forms, perhaps abandoning flesh for energy-based existence, paralleled contemporary debates about artificial intelligence, cybernetic augmentation, and digital consciousness. He had spoken of humans merging with the cosmos, transcending biological limits, and achieving immortality through science. To many, this seemed fantastical in the early 20th century, but in the 21st century, as technology moves toward brain-computer interfaces and radical life extension, his speculations appear remarkably prescient. He is cited not only in aerospace engineering, but also in conferences on the philosophy of mind, the ethics of enhancement, and the future of humanity. Cultural memory of Tsiolkovsky deepened in the post-Soviet era. Freed from the heavy hand of propaganda, his life story was told with greater nuance. Scholars examined the hardships he endured, the poverty, the isolation, the skepticism of peers. They studied the influence of Russian cosmism, situating him among thinkers like Fedorov and Vernadsky, who saw humanity's destiny in cosmic terms. They explored his religious background, his engagement with ideas of immortality, and his attempts to reconcile science with metaphysical hope. This enriched understanding made him more than a symbol. It made him a human being whose genius emerged from struggle. His deafness, once seen as a tragic limitation, came to be understood as a condition that focused his attention inward, away from the noise of society and toward the clarity of mathematics and imagination. In Kaluga, the museum dedicated to his life grew into an international center of space culture. Visitors from around the world came to see the humble origins of the man whose ideas had shaped the space age. Exhibitions displayed his manuscripts, models, and personal belongings. Engineers and astronauts paid homage, acknowledging that their journeys began in his equations. School children learned his story, inspired by the notion that greatness can emerge from obscurity. Each visitor confronted the paradox that the father of astronautics had lived in modest poverty, that the prophet of the cosmos had rarely left his provincial town, that the man who described journeys to other worlds had never traveled far beyond his own, and yet it was precisely in that modest setting that the universe opened in his mind. As humanity entered the 21st century, Tsiolkovsky's relevance did not fade. Plans for Mars, colonization, asteroid mining, and interstellar probes echoed his visions. Companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin invoked the very themes he had articulated: the necessity of making humanity multiplanetary, the inevitability of expansion into space, the moral duty to ensure survival beyond Earth. Elon Musk's statements about colonizing Mars as insurance for humanity's future resonate with Tsiolkovsky's insistence that life must not remain confined to one planet. Jeff Bezos's dream of orbital colonies reflects Tsiolkovsky's rotating habitats. What he had written with pen and ink in Kaluga became the language of 21st century entrepreneurs shaping space policy. Though separated by time and ideology, they carried forward his torch. His name endures not only in museums and textbooks, but also in celestial geography. The crater Tsiolkovsky on the Moon remains a silent monument, visible only from lunar orbit, a reminder that his vision extended far beyond Earth. Asteroids, streets, and institutions bear his name. Each commemoration reaffirms his place in history, but the truest commemoration lies in every rocket launch, every satellite, every spacecraft that leaves Earth. Each ascent is a reenactment of his dream, each orbit a confirmation of his faith in humanity's cosmic destiny. His life offers lessons beyond science. It teaches perseverance in the face of ridicule, resilience in poverty, and faith in vision when recognition seems impossible. It demonstrates that the boundaries of imagination are as important as the boundaries of laboratories. It shows that genius can emerge from silence, that the greatest ideas often germinate in solitude, and that the laughter of contemporaries is no verdict on the future. Tsiolkovsky's story stands as an invitation to dream boldly, to calculate rigorously, and to believe that humanity's destiny is greater than its present circumstances. As the 21st century unfolded, the world confronted challenges Tsiolkovsky himself had anticipated in philosophical form. Climate change, pandemics, nuclear tensions, and environmental degradation all underscored the fragility of life on a single planet. In his writings, he had warned that humanity confined to Earth was vulnerable to catastrophe. He saw expansion into space not as luxury, but as necessity. Now, as scientists and policymakers debated planetary defense against asteroids, the construction of backup biospheres, and the colonization of Mars, his words acquired new urgency. What had once been dismissed as utopian musings became part of serious discourse. His prophetic tone seemed less like exaggeration and more like foresight sharpened by solitude. In academic conferences, Tsiolkovsky's name reappeared not only in sessions on astronautics, but also in panels on existential risk. Scholars of global catastrophic threats cited his insistence that survival demanded diversification beyond Earth. Economists and political scientists debated the feasibility of space colonies, often invoking his conviction that resources of the solar system must eventually sustain humanity. Philosophers of technology considered his cosmism as an early articulation of the argument that intelligence must expand into the universe to fulfill its potential. Across disciplines, his voice echoed, carried not by propaganda but by the relevance of his thought. Artists and writers also rediscovered him. Science fiction, which had long drawn inspiration from his essays, found renewed resonance in his vision of orbital habitats and interstellar travel. Novels portrayed characters quoting his famous line about the cradle of humanity. Films included nods to his ideas of rotating stations and ecological life support systems. Even visual art adopted his themes. Murals, digital renderings, and installations depicted cosmic colonies, sometimes inscribed with his name. These cultural echoes kept him alive in imagination, ensuring that new generations encountered his vision not only in technical manuals, but in stories and images. For a man who had drawn from Jules Verne in his youth, it was fitting that he himself became a source of creative inspiration for others. In Russia, his memory retained special status. The Kaluga Museum expanded its exhibitions, incorporating modern spacecraft alongside his manuscripts. School curricula continued to present him as a national hero, but increasingly with nuance, acknowledging the hardships of his life. Scholars examined the details of his family struggles, his near-total deafness, and the poverty in which he raised 7 children. They explored the psychological dimensions of his solitude, the resilience that allowed him to persist despite neglect, and the philosophical optimism that transformed hardship into cosmic vision. This humanized portrait deepened admiration. He was not a flawless prophet, but a man who wrestled with despair and yet clung to hope. His greatness lay not in privilege, but in perseverance. Internationally, his image expanded as well. Space agencies in Europe, America, and Asia acknowledged him in historical retrospectives. Lunar missions referenced the crater named in his honor. Academic journals translated his lesser-known essays, making his thought accessible beyond Russian speakers. The more scholars read him, the more they recognize the breadth of his vision. He was not merely a technician of rocketry, but a thinker who integrated science, philosophy, and destiny. This integration distinguished him in a century when disciplines often fragmented. He showed that imagination and calculation could coexist, that equations and metaphysical speculation could reinforce each other, that science without vision was incomplete. Perhaps the most striking aspect of Tsiolkovsky's legacy is the way it straddles the boundary between inspiration and warning. His life inspires because it demonstrates that one person, isolated and ridiculed, can shape the destiny of humanity. Yet it also warns that societies often fail to recognize genius in its own time, that neglect and mockery can suppress vision, that history risks silencing its prophets. The fact that he spent decades in obscurity, his papers ignored, his household in poverty, reminds us of the cost of short-sightedness. His eventual recognition does not erase the suffering of those years, nor the possibility that other voices equally profound may have been lost. In this sense, his story calls for humility, for vigilance in listening to unconventional thinkers whose ideas seem strange today but may shape tomorrow. Modern entrepreneurs of spaceflight, often cast as visionaries, find themselves compared to Tsiolkovsky. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and others are described as heirs to his dream. Their companies cite his principles, multiplanetary destiny, orbital colonies, sustainable ecosystems as guiding ideals, yet the comparison is imperfect. Tsiolkovsky lived in poverty, without institutions or funding, writing in obscurity. Modern entrepreneurs command billions, shape industries, and influence governments. The contrast highlights the uniqueness of his achievement. He imagined the future without resources, powered only by conviction. If today's space billionaires build upon his vision, they do so with means he never possessed. That he, with so little, conceived so much, underscores the power of thought as the ultimate engine of progress. Meanwhile, ethical debates about space colonization increasingly reflect themes he anticipated. Questions about the exploitation of extraterrestrial resources, the governance of space colonies, the moral implications of genetic modification, and the long-term fate of consciousness all find antecedents in his writings. He spoke of the transformation of humanity, of new forms of existence, of moral evolution alongside technological. He believed that expansion into space would not only secure survival, but also elevate the species. His optimism about human potential remains a counterpoint to contemporary anxieties. He reminds us that fear alone cannot guide destiny. Vision must also play its part. In reflecting on Tsiolkovsky's enduring relevance, one recognizes that his legacy is not confined to the past. It is ongoing, unfolding each time a rocket ignites, each time a satellite circles Earth, each time humanity contemplates the stars. His life story, from deaf child in Ryazan to prophet of the cosmos, continues to resonate because it encapsulates the paradox of human progress. Fragility and greatness intertwined, poverty and genius coexisting, ridicule and vindication linked. He embodies the truth that imagination, when fused with calculation, can transcend circumstance and alter destiny. As the 21st century advanced, Tsiolkovsky's presence continued to expand beyond the boundaries of science into the broader culture of education and collective identity. In Russia, his story was taught not only as part of the history of space exploration, but also as a moral lesson about perseverance. Teachers described the boy who lost his hearing to scarlet fever, the young man who educated himself in libraries, the provincial school teacher who endured ridicule, and the elder thinker who wrote of cosmic futures from a wooden house. For students, he became a symbol that genius does not require privilege or wealth, that curiosity and resilience can overcome adversity. In classrooms across the country, his famous statement about humanity's cradle was repeated as a mantra of aspiration. His life was woven into the fabric of national education as both history and parable. Internationally, too, his example inspired educators. Programs designed to encourage children toward science and engineering cited his biography as proof that creativity often arises from solitude and struggle. Textbooks in multiple languages included his rocket equation as a fundamental concept in astronautics, introducing students to his name early in their studies. Museums abroad included his image in exhibitions about the pioneers of spaceflight. The message conveyed was clear. Tsiolkovsky belonged not only to Russia, but to humanity, for his ideas had transcended borders and ideologies. He became part of a shared human heritage, a figure who connected mathematics, imagination, and destiny. Psychologically, his story resonated with the archetype of the visionary prophet, the one who sees what others cannot and suffers for that sight. Analysts and historians often compared him to biblical seers, medieval mystics, or Renaissance geniuses who were misunderstood in their own times. His deafness, isolation, and obsessive dedication seemed to set him apart from ordinary existence, placing him in the role of the outsider who perceives truths hidden from the crowd. In this interpretation, his equations were more than technical tools. They were revelations. His manuscripts were not simply scientific papers, but testaments of a man compelled to speak for the future. This symbolic dimension elevated his memory from the technical to the mythic, from the historical to the timeless. In Russia, he became entwined with the cultural movement of Cosmism, which blended science, philosophy, and spirituality. Cosmism asserted that humanity was destined to conquer space, to achieve immortality, and to resurrect the dead through technology. While Tsiolkovsky did not endorse every mystical claim of Cosmism, his own writings often paralleled its spirit. He spoke of the cosmic destiny of life, the inevitability of expansion, and the transformation of humanity into higher form. In this context, he was regarded not only as a scientist, but also as a sage, a man who gave scientific legitimacy to philosophical longings. His presence bridged rational calculation with metaphysical aspiration, allowing both to coexist in the same narrative of progress. Historians of science have noted how unique this synthesis was. Whereas most pioneers of rocketry in the West focused narrowly on propulsion or aerodynamics, Tsiolkovsky embraced a holistic vision. He did not see rockets as isolated machines, but as parts of a grand cosmic story. For him, equations were not cold abstractions, but steps toward a destiny written in the stars. This integration of technical rigor with philosophical breadth distinguished him from Goddard or Oberth, placing him in a category of his own. He was not merely an engineer of devices, he was an engineer of destiny. This dual role explains why his legacy endures beyond aerospace into philosophy, literature, and art. As space exploration entered new phases, interplanetary probes, robotic explorers on Mars, telescopes peering into galaxies billions of light years away, his name continued to be invoked. Scientists presenting data from distant planets reminded audiences that Tsiolkovsky had first articulated the necessity of leaving Earth. Engineers working on designs for Mars habitats noted that he had sketched the idea of closed ecological systems a century earlier. Advocates for asteroid mining recalled his writings about extracting resources from space. In each case, his vision provided historical depth, reminding humanity that its boldest ventures were not sudden inventions, but the fulfillment of long-seated dreams. The continuity from his notebooks to modern laboratories underscored the power of imagination as the root of progress. Culturally, his memory straddled the line between myth and reality. On one hand, he was a real man, with documented struggles, equations, and manuscripts. On the other, he became a mythic figure, an icon of cosmic aspiration. Statues depicted him gazing skyward, hand lifted, as if pointing humanity to the stars. Paintings portrayed him among rockets and galaxies, a prophet of the cosmos. His words were quoted in contexts far beyond science, appearing in poetry, music, and even political speeches. The man who once lived in obscurity became an emblem recognized by millions, his life reimagined as a parable of human destiny. This blending of fact and myth reflects the way societies transform visionaries into symbols, preserving their memory not only as individuals, but as embodiments of collective hope. The paradox of his influence remained compelling. He had no laboratories, no institutions, no wealth, no fame in his prime, and yet his influence spread across centuries, shaping global trajectories. His case challenges assumptions about the sources of innovation. It suggests that great ideas may arise in isolation, that the absence of resources can sometimes sharpen imagination, that marginal figures may carry the seeds of future revolutions. His life calls into question the structures that define authority in science. He shows that the margins can be as fertile as the centers, that the solitary thinker can rival the institution, that vision is not the monopoly of privilege. For societies seeking to nurture creativity, his example serves both as encouragement and as warning. In the 21st century, as humanity contemplates interstellar exploration, his voice still speaks. Concepts of light sails, generation ships, and long-duration habitats resonate with his early speculations. Discussions about merging biology with technology echo his predictions of human transformation. Debates about the ethics of colonizing other planets reflect his belief that expansion is both destiny and duty. In all these, his presence lingers, reminding humanity that the road to the stars began not with rockets of metal, but with visions on paper, not with laboratories, but with imagination, not with power, but with perseverance. His legacy is both a compass and a challenge. To continue what he began, to carry forward the dream he nurtured in silence. In the modern era, Tsiolkovsky's legacy is often invoked not only in technical discussions, but in debates about the meaning of humanity's place in the universe. As telescopes reveal billions of galaxies, as astrophysics uncovers exoplanets potentially habitable, and as artificial intelligence begins to augment human capability, the questions he posed echo with renewed force. What is humanity's role in the cosmos? Is intelligence a fleeting accident, or a phenomenon destined to expand and endure? Can human beings, fragile in biology and divided in politics, truly become a cosmic species? These questions, which now animate conferences, manifestos, and philosophies, were articulated in embryonic form by Tsiolkovsky, writing alone in Kaluga, decades before rockets left the ground. His conviction that humanity must expand into space has become a cornerstone of long-term strategic thinking. Governments consider planetary defense against asteroids, echoing his warnings of vulnerability. Private companies invest billions in spacecraft to reach Mars, echoing his insistence on colonization. Non-profit organizations promote interstellar research, echoing his vision of eventual journeys to distant stars. In each case, his words serve as a touchstone, a reminder that these ambitions did not arise suddenly, but have deep intellectual roots. His life story provides legitimacy to these efforts, grounding futuristic plans in a lineage of thought stretching back more than a century. Ethically, his vision continues to provoke reflection. He insisted that humanity had a moral duty to expand, to spread life, to ensure survival. Yet modern thinkers grapple with the implications. What responsibilities do we bear toward other worlds, ecosystems, or hypothetical alien life? Is colonization a right, or must it be tempered by caution? Tsiolkovsky himself emphasized the grandeur of spreading life as a universal good, but contemporary debates introduce nuance. Some argue that expansion risks reproducing exploitation beyond Earth, that humanity must learn stewardship before conquest. Others argue that survival outweighs caution, that the imperative to endure justifies bold expansion. In these debates, his optimism provides inspiration, while his silence on certain dilemmas invites reinterpretation. His legacy becomes not only a guide, but a field of contention, a foundation upon which new ethics are built. Culturally, his transformation into symbol continues. In Russia, his statues stand in public squares, his quotations appear on walls of schools, and his name graces institutes of technology. In other countries, his image circulates in academic publications, documentaries, and exhibitions. He has become an international icon, though always with a distinctly Russian core. The solitary figure in provincial Kaluga, gazing at the heavens, scribbling equations by lamplight. This image resonates universally because it embodies the archetype of the visionary, frail in circumstance, mighty in imagination. It reminds us that greatness often wears humble clothes, that the future is born in obscurity, that the cosmos may reveal itself first, not to powerful institutions, but to solitary dreamers. Historians increasingly place him within the broader narrative of human curiosity. They compare him to ancient philosophers who speculated about the heavens, to Renaissance scientists who defied dogma, to Enlightenment thinkers who sought natural law. In this continuum, Tsiolkovsky appears as the figure who carried the human imagination from speculation to calculation, from myth to equation, from wonder to engineering. His life marks the transition between dreaming of flight in literature and building machines to achieve it. He stands at the hinge between fantasy and reality, turning the page of history from what might be to what must be. In this sense, his importance extends beyond rocketry. He represents the moment when humanity claimed the stars not only in poetry, but in mathematics. Philosophically, his cosmism continues to inspire. His belief that intelligence is the universe becoming conscious of itself resonates with modern cosmology. His prediction that humans might transform into higher forms aligns with debates about posthumanism. His optimism about immortality through science parallels modern research in biotechnology and digital consciousness. While some dismiss these ideas as speculative, others see in them the outline of a future already beginning. In either case, his writings ensure that the conversation continues, that humanity never forgets to ask the larger questions even while solving immediate problems. He reminds us that engineering without vision is blind, that science without purpose is incomplete. In education, his story retains power because it conveys both humility and audacity. Teachers tell students that he was a poor boy who lost his hearing, that he had no formal degree, that he taught in a provincial school, and yet he changed the destiny of the species. They emphasize that perseverance matters as much as genius, that imagination can triumph over adversity, that ridicule is not the measure of truth. His life becomes a mirror for every student who doubts their potential, every young mind who feels excluded from privilege. If Tsiolkovsky could reach the stars from Kaluga, then no dream is too large, no obstacle insurmountable. This educational role may be his most enduring gift, not only the equations, but the courage to imagine. In popular imagination, He straddles the boundary between man and myth. For scientists, he is the father of astronautics. For philosophers, he is a prophet of cosmism. For artists, he is a muse of cosmic imagery. For educators, he is a parable of perseverance. In this multiplicity lies his power. He cannot be confined to a single category, for his influence radiates in many directions. His story is not linear, but concentric, rippling outward into disciplines, cultures, and generations. The deaf school teacher of Kaluga has become an archetype, a figure whose life resonates wherever humanity asks what lies beyond. The paradox of his legacy endures. He never launched a rocket, never held a university chair, never commanded a laboratory. Yet his name is carved into the moon, printed in textbooks, spoken by astronauts. His life was marked by obscurity, yet his afterlife is marked by universality. He stands as a reminder that influence is not measured by contemporary fame, but by the resonance of ideas across time. In the silence of his study, he spoke to the future, and the future listened. His voice, carried through equations and visions, now echoes in every launch that shakes the sky, every satellite that circles Earth, every probe that journeys into the void. And as humanity prepares for the next leaps, colonies on Mars, voyages to the outer planets, perhaps one day interstellar missions, his presence will remain. Engineers will calculate with his equation, philosophers will ponder his cosmism, and dreamers will draw courage from his story. The man once mocked for writing of spaceships has become the foundation of humanity's ascent. His life demonstrates that ridicule can be the shadow of genius, that poverty can be the cradle of greatness, that solitude can be the forge of destiny. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, born in obscurity, deafened in childhood, dismissed in life, has become immortal in memory. The cradle of humanity has been left, and his hand, reaching from the past, still points the way forward. The persistence of Tsiolkovsky's presence in the collective imagination reflects not only the power of his ideas, but also the resonance of his life story as a narrative of human aspiration. His biography, often retold, is shaped into a legend, the deaf child who became the prophet of space. Each retelling emphasizes certain themes: the silence of his youth, the solitude of his self-education, the poverty of his adulthood, the ridicule he endured, the cosmic grandeur of his vision. In this structure, his life becomes a parable, a story told not merely for historical accuracy, but for inspiration. It functions like a myth of origin, a founding story for the space age. Just as ancient cultures preserved myths of heroes who stole fire or discovered agriculture, modern humanity preserves the story of the teacher from Kaluga who gave them the stars. What distinguishes his legacy is that it operates on multiple levels at once. At the scientific level, his rocket equation and his analyses of propulsion remain indispensable. At the cultural level, his quotations and imagery inspire art and literature. At the philosophical level, his cosmism offers a framework for thinking about humanity's place in the universe. At the educational level, his life story encourages perseverance. This multiplicity ensures that he cannot be confined to any single narrative. He belongs to science, but also to philosophy, to art, to education, to culture. His influence radiates outward, like the concentric ripples of a stone cast into a cosmic pond, touching fields he never directly engaged. This radiance is what makes him timeless. In the global context, his role in the history of science is increasingly recognized as unique. Where Western pioneers, like Goddard, focused on experiments and Oberth on systematic design, Tsiolkovsky combined both with a sweeping philosophical vision. He treated rocketry not as an end in itself, but as a stage in the evolution of life. He spoke of colonizing space not as conquest, but as necessity. He saw humanity not merely as earthbound creatures, but as seeds destined to germinate among the stars. This holistic perspective resonates today as the conversation about space expands beyond engineering into ethics, economics, and sociology. He anticipated the interdisciplinary nature of space studies, insisting that one could not separate technical feasibility from human destiny. In this sense, he was a century ahead of his time. As humanity confronts 21st century challenges, his optimism provides a counterweight to despair. He believed in progress not because he ignored suffering, but because he endured it. His optimism was not naive, but defiant. He saw in science the power to overcome limitation, in imagination the capacity to overcome ridicule, in perseverance the strength to overcome neglect. This defiant optimism remains relevant in an age beset by crises. When climate reports warn of catastrophe, when political divisions deepen, when the future seems uncertain, Tsiolkovsky's voice reminds us that humanity is capable of transcendence. His life itself testifies to the possibility of triumph against adversity. If he could imagine the stars from the silence of his provincial study, then perhaps humanity can find solutions in the silence of its present crises. The ethical dimension of his legacy grows more significant as technology advances. He insisted that expansion into space was a moral duty, that life must spread to ensure its survival. In this assertion, he anticipated contemporary debates about existential risk. Today, thinkers like Nick Bostrom argue for the necessity of safeguarding humanity's future across millennia. Organizations like the Long Now Foundation advocate for long-term thinking. Space agencies discuss planetary defense. Private companies dream of multi-planetary existence. All these echo the moral urgency of Tsiolkovsky's conviction. He believed that survival demanded vision, that vision demanded action, and that action demanded perseverance. His ethic was simple yet profound. Humanity must not remain confined to Earth, for confinement is vulnerability, and vulnerability is extinction. The symbolism of his life continues to inspire. Statues often depict him pointing skyward, as if directing humanity's gaze beyond its immediate struggles. Museums preserve his humble belongings, reminding visitors that greatness can emerge from simplicity. His face appears on stamps and coins, embedding him in the everyday lives of citizens. His quotations circulate online, shared as motivational affirmations. Each of these representations contributes to the myth of Tsiolkovsky, but beneath them lies the historical reality of a man who lived through poverty, obscurity, and ridicule. The myth inspires, the history humbles, and together they form a complete legacy. Inspiration grounded in struggle, vision grounded in perseverance. Globally, his legacy is increasingly interpreted in universal terms. He is not seen merely as a Russian hero, but as a human visionary. His story is told in classrooms from Tokyo to New York. His quotations appear in speeches from Paris to Delhi. His equations are taught in universities worldwide. This universality reflects the nature of his vision. He spoke not for one nation, but for humanity. His dream was not limited by borders or ideologies, but extended to the cosmos itself. In this, he transcends the context of his time, becoming a figure who belongs to all ages and all peoples. His legacy illustrates how ideas rooted in one life can become the heritage of an entire species. In art, his image continues to inspire. Paintings depict him among rockets and galaxies, films reference his visions, literature quotes his words, music compositions include his lines, treating them as lyrical affirmations of human destiny. Even in digital media, his presence persists, as artists create virtual renderings of his cosmic dream. These artistic echoes ensure that his vision is not confined to textbooks, but remains alive in imagination. They extend his influence into the cultural bloodstream, ensuring that new generations encounter him not only through equations, but through beauty. This artistic dimension fulfills one of his deepest convictions, that humanity's destiny is not merely survival but flourishing, not merely endurance but creativity, not merely existence but transcendence. As humanity contemplates interstellar travel, his voice remains relevant. Concepts like Breakthrough Starshot, with its vision of sending probes to Alpha Centauri using light sails, echo his early speculations. Plans for Mars colonies echo his conviction of necessity. Discussions about orbital habitats echo his diagrams. Even the language of cosmic destiny, used in manifestos of modern space advocates, echoes his cosmism. His presence is felt whenever humanity looks beyond Earth and dares to imagine futures measured in centuries and light years. His story is invoked whenever skeptics dismiss such visions as fantasy. He stands as proof that what seems impossible today may be inevitable tomorrow. His life demonstrates that ridicule is often the prelude to vindication. Ultimately, the story of Konstantin Tsiolkovsky is the story of humanity itself. Fragile, mocked, constrained, yet dreaming, persisting, and reaching. His life embodies the tension between limitation and aspiration, between poverty and grandeur, between ridicule and vindication. He reminds us that greatness is not measured by recognition but by perseverance, that truth is not always recognized in its time, that vision can outlast circumstance. His presence continues to speak because he represents the eternal struggle of humanity. To rise from the dust, to look at the stars, to imagine, to endure, to ascend. The deaf school teacher from Kaluga gave humanity not only the mathematics of rocketry, but the courage to dream of the cosmos. And in that gift lies his immortality. In every new era of exploration, Tsiolkovsky seems to rise again, his words invoked to frame the meaning of fresh achievements. When satellites form networks around Earth providing communication to billions, his concept of orbiting stations feels realized. When probes cross the boundaries of the solar system, his conviction that humanity must one day travel to distant stars gains new gravity. When astronauts and cosmonauts describe the Earth from space as a fragile blue sphere, his writings about the necessity of transcending the cradle echo in their reflections. Even when private companies launched tourists into suborbital space, commentators recall that a provincial schoolteacher in the 19th century first articulated the possibility of such voyages. His life story has become a refrain. The visionary dismissed in his lifetime, the prophet vindicated by history. What fascinates scholars is how seamlessly his personal philosophy blended with his technical insights. He was not only calculating mass ratios, but also reflecting on the destiny of life. He was not only designing rockets on paper, but also imagining the moral imperative of spreading beyond Earth. This duality gave his writings a depth that resonates across disciplines. Scientists appreciate his equations, philosophers his cosmism, artists his imagery, educators his perseverance. This breadth explains why his influence endures. He was not merely a technician, but a thinker who placed technology within a cosmic narrative. He insisted that science must serve a vision, that engineering must be wedded to meaning. In a century when technology often seems detached from purpose, his integration feels increasingly relevant. Historians note the remarkable persistence of his equation. The Tsiolkovsky rocket equation remains fundamental to every launch, every trajectory, every plan for interplanetary travel. No spacecraft escapes its logic. From the smallest satellite to the largest interplanetary probe, engineers must reckon with the same relationship he wrote in 1903. That a single equation, scribbled by a man working in isolation, governs all human ascent into space is astonishing. It underscores the universality of mathematics, the way truth transcends circumstance. His equation is both a technical tool and a symbolic link, binding the present to the solitary mind in Kaluga who first articulated it. Beyond equations, his visions of space colonies continue to inspire. Architects of future habitats study his diagrams of rotating stations to simulate gravity. Designers of ecological systems for Mars recall his essays on closed environments. Futurists who imagine millions living in orbit cite his writings as precedent. Even entertainment industries, creating fictional depictions of space life, draw unconsciously from his imagery. His vision permeates cultural imagination so thoroughly that it is often invoked without attribution, its ideas becoming part of the collective vocabulary of space. The very concept of humanity thriving among the stars owes a debt to his pen. The moral dimension of his legacy also persists. He believed that to spread life into the cosmos was not only possible but right. He framed expansion as duty, a responsibility to future generations and to life itself. In an age when humanity grapples with environmental crises and existential risks, this framing gains resonance. His optimism contrasts with contemporary pessimism, offering an alternative narrative. Where some see only danger in technology, he saw potential. Where some despair at limitations, he insisted on transcendence. His faith in science as a force of liberation may seem out of step with modern skepticism, yet it continues to inspire those who seek solutions rather than resignation. Culturally, his myth grows richer with each retelling. In biographies, he appears as both visionary and human, the deaf child, the patient teacher, the misunderstood thinker, the cosmic prophet. In literature, he is cast as a precursor to all spacefaring heroes. In art, he is depicted as gazing skyward, hand raised toward the infinite. In education, he is presented as a model of perseverance. This layering of meanings ensures that his story never becomes static. Each generation retells it in its own way, finding in him reflections of its own hopes and fears. To some, he embodies progress. To others, resilience. To all, aspiration. His universality is increasingly recognized. Though rooted in Russian culture, his vision transcends national boundaries. His ideas belong to humanity as a whole, for the cosmos is not the possession of any one nation. International collaborations in space, like the International Space Station, embody this universality. When astronauts from different countries work together in orbit, they fulfill not only technical plans but also philosophical visions. Tsiolkovsky's insistence that humanity must transcend divisions to pursue cosmic destiny resonates in such collaborations. His legacy becomes a unifying symbol, a reminder that the stars belong to everyone. As science progresses toward interstellar exploration, his relevance only increases. Concepts of starships propelled by nuclear fusion, antimatter, or light sails all operate within the framework he established. His insistence that humanity must prepare for millennia resonates with long-term projects. His vision of eventual transformation into higher beings aligns with contemporary speculation about artificial intelligence and posthuman evolution. In this sense, his writings remain not relics of the past, but signposts for the future. He continues to speak because his vision encompassed not only his time, but the centuries to come. The deeper lesson of his life is the power of perseverance. Deafness might have silenced him, poverty might have constrained him, ridicule might have broken him, yet he persisted. His notebooks testify to nights of labor, calculations scratched in margins, visions articulated despite indifference. His life shows that the future belongs to those who refuse to surrender to circumstance. It teaches that the greatest revolutions often begin in obscurity, that the most profound ideas often endure ridicule, that truth often waits decades for recognition. This lesson transcends science, offering inspiration to anyone who struggles against adversity. His story is not only about rockets, but about resilience. As humanity looks toward the future, his voice remains inescapable. Every plan for Mars, every dream of colonies, every vision of interstellar travel carries echoes of his thought. He lives in the equations, in the imagery, in the aspirations. He lives in the statues, in the museums, in the classroom. He lives in the imagination of humanity, whispering that the cradle must be left, that the stars await, that the destiny of intelligence is infinite. His immortality is not mystical but real, embodied in the trajectory of a species that took his dream as compass. In this sense, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky remains alive, his hand still pointing skyward, his voice still urging humanity forward. The endurance of Tsiolkovsky's name in the 21st century is a testament not only to his intellectual foresight, but also to the human need for figures who embody the marriage of vision and perseverance. Every civilization seeks its exemplars, those who carry the torch of imagination into realms others dismiss as impossible. In this role, Tsiolkovsky stands beside the great explorers of history. Just as Columbus or Magellan represented the leap across oceans, he represents the leap into the cosmos. Just as Galileo and Newton transformed the heavens from mystical spheres into mathematical realities, he transformed the dream of spaceflight from fantasy into calculation. His life embodies the transition from myth to science, from wish to plan, from speculation to inevitability. What strikes many readers of his work is the clarity with which he articulated truths that remain relevant today. He described staging as necessary for escaping Earth's gravity, and every rocket still relies on it. He described orbital habitats, and modern engineers still design them. He described ecological systems recycling air and water, and researchers still test them. He described humanity's vulnerability on Earth, and scientists still warn of risks. He described the necessity of spreading life, and futurists still argue for colonization. His words have not aged into irrelevance, they have matured into foundations. This continuity between his vision and present practice ensures that his name is invoked not nostalgically, but practically. He remains a partner in contemporary conversation even a century after his greatest work. In Russia, his symbolic role continues to evolve. Kaluga remains a place of pilgrimage for scientists, students, and tourists. The museum dedicated to him is more than a display of artifacts. It is a shrine to imagination. Visitors see the desk where he wrote, the models he built, the lamp that lit his nights. They walk through exhibits that trace the line from his manuscripts to rockets and spacecraft. They leave with the sense that the path to the stars began in those humble rooms. His presence lingers in the air of Kaluga, as though the walls themselves still vibrate with the force of his visions. Local children grow up surrounded by his story, absorbing the lesson that even the most provincial town can be the birthplace of cosmic dreams. Outside Russia, his recognition is less personal but equally profound. Space historians around the world regard him as essential to the genealogy of astronautics. Textbooks on space science include his equation. Conferences on astronautics invoke his name. Universities teaching aerospace engineering remind students that their calculations rest on his foundation. This international acknowledgement reflects the universality of his contribution. He belongs not only to Russia but to humanity, for his ideas transcended the borders of his time. The rockets that rise from Florida or French Guiana obey the same principles he wrote in Kaluga. The satellites that orbit Earth, regardless of flag, validate his mathematics. The dreams of Mars and beyond, whether pursued by Americans, Europeans, Chinese, or Indians, all trace back to his insistence that humanity must leave the cradle. Philosophically, his cosmism finds new relevance in an age of existential reflection. As artificial intelligence advances, as biotechnology reshapes life, as humanity contemplates its future beyond Earth, Tsiolkovsky's belief in the transformation of humanity resonates. He wrote of evolution continuing beyond biology, of intelligence merging with the cosmos, of immortality achieved through science. Modern thinkers discuss digital consciousness, machine integration, genetic modification, and cosmic survival. In these debates, his voice seems prophetic, not because he described specifics, but because he framed the horizon. He insisted that the human story does not end with Earth, that intelligence must transcend, that destiny is cosmic. This framing continues to guide those who seek to place present challenges within the arc of millennia. Artists and writers also keep him alive. Novels reference his quotations, films allude to his visions, artworks depict him pointing skyward. His image circulates as an icon of aspiration. Even in popular culture, his name appears when humanity's future in space is discussed. He has become a shorthand for the idea that what seems impossible today may be inevitable tomorrow. For young dreamers, encountering his story is a revelation that one man, poor and isolated, deaf and ridiculed, could imagine a future that entire nations would one day pursue. His life reassures them that vision matters, that perseverance matters, that ridicule is not the end but the beginning. In this sense, he functions as a mentor across time, whispering encouragement to those who dare to dream. The paradox of his existence continues to provoke reflection. He never traveled beyond Russia, yet he mapped the cosmos. He never commanded laboratories, yet he founded a discipline. He never held power, yet his ideas shaped empires. He never heard the roar of a rocket, yet his equation governs them all. He lived in obscurity, yet he is remembered in universality. This paradox underscores a truth. Greatness is not defined by circumstance, but by vision. Tsiolkovsky reminds humanity that limits can be transcended, that poverty does not silence genius, that isolation does not extinguish imagination. His life is proof that truth does not require recognition to endure, that vision does not require power to prevail. As humanity looks toward the future, his influence deepens rather than diminishes. The challenges of colonizing Mars, of building sustainable habitats, of traveling to the outer planets, all require principles he articulated. The philosophical justification for such efforts, the sense that humanity must expand to survive, also comes from him. Each new generation rediscovers him, not as relic, but as guide. His writings remain alive because they address the fundamental question, what is humanity's destiny? As long as that question is asked, his voice will be heard. He will remain in the equations, in the visions, in the debates, in the art, in the inspiration. He will remain because he articulated not only a technical pathway, but a cosmic calling. Every epoch reinterprets Tsiolkovsky according to its own needs. In the Soviet Union, he was portrayed as the prophet of socialism's technological destiny, a symbol that Russia had always carried the seed of cosmic achievement. In post-Soviet Russia, he became both national treasure and global figure, a reminder that genius transcends ideology. In the West, he was adopted into the pantheon of pioneers, recognized as one of the three pillars of astronautics, alongside Goddard and Oberth. In the 21st century, he has become more than scientist or symbol. He has become a moral compass for those seeking to justify space exploration in the face of terrestrial crises. His words are quoted not only in engineering papers, but in speeches about climate change, in essays about existential risk, and in manifestos about humanity's long-term survival. What makes his voice so enduring is its blend of calculation and conviction. He did not merely speculate, he computed. He did not merely dream, he derived equations. He did not merely fantasize, he wrote with rigor. This combination gives his writings unusual authority. When he declared that humanity must not remain in the cradle, he was not only making a poetic statement, but grounding it in physics. He had shown that rockets could, in principle, overcome gravity, that orbits could, in principle, be achieved, that colonies could, in principle, be sustained. His conviction rested on the solidity of mathematics. This marriage of poetry and proof is why his legacy survives, both in technical manuals and in inspirational speeches. He bridges the divide between the head and the heart, between reason and vision. In modern debates, his cosmism has become a fertile field of interpretation. Some read it as an early form of transhumanism, anticipating the transformation of humanity through science. Others interpret it as ecological, emphasizing his insistence on closed systems and sustainable life. Still others view it as spiritual, seeing in his writings the yearning for immortality and cosmic unity. Each interpretation reflects part of his complex vision. He was not reducible to one category. He embraced multiplicity. His mind ranged from propulsion nozzles to metaphysical speculations, from equations to immortality. This breadth makes him difficult to classify, but also ensures that he remains relevant across disciplines. He was simultaneously engineer, philosopher, futurist, and mystic. This hybridity is precisely what the modern world requires, for the challenges of space demand both technical rigor and philosophical depth. The paradox of his poverty continues to inspire. He lived in material scarcity, yet he imagined abundance beyond Earth. He patched shoes for his children, yet he calculated orbits for humanity. He worried about firewood in winter, yet he described colonies in space warmed by the Sunday. This contrast has become part of his legend, a reminder that imagination is not bound by circumstance. Indeed, some argue that his poverty sharpened his vision, forcing him to seek wealth not in possessions, but in ideas. His deafness, too, is reinterpreted. What once isolated him from society may have attuned him more closely to the inner voice of imagination. These hardships, transmuted by perseverance, became conditions of genius. His life is not only inspiration, but also caution. How many other Tsiolkovskys has history silenced through neglect? His story urges societies to support eccentric thinkers, lest visions of the future remain unwritten. Globally, his influence has become a unifying symbol in an age of division. As nations compete in space, his words remind them that the cosmos is not the property of any one people. His insistence that humanity must expand speaks to the species as a whole. When astronauts from different countries shake hands aboard the International Space Station, they embody his vision of unity in pursuit of cosmic destiny. When global agencies cooperate on telescopes or probes, they affirm his belief that humanity's future lies beyond borders. His universality transcends politics, offering a narrative of cooperation in an era often defined by rivalry. He shows that the cosmos, unlike Earth, cannot be carved into territories. It belongs to all, and in that belonging lies humanity's shared identity. In education, his story has become a pedagogical tool not only in Russia, but worldwide. Teachers use his life to illustrate resilience, his equations to demonstrate the power of mathematics, his vision to inspire creativity. Students learn that science is not only a matter of laboratories, but of imagination. They see that the boundaries of possibility are drawn first in thought, then in experiment, then in achievement. Tsiolkovsky becomes a model for the integration of creativity and discipline, showing that inspiration must be married to rigor, that vision must be grounded in calculation, that dreams must be pursued through persistence. His life demonstrates that the road to the stars begins not with rockets, but with curiosity. Artists continue to reinvent his image. In literature, he is cast as a prophetic figure who foresaw humanity's ascent. In cinema, he is referenced in documentaries and fictional films alike, often depicted as the wise elder pointing to the heavens. In visual arts, statues and murals present him with outstretched hand, his gaze fixed on the infinite. In music, composers set his quotations to choral works, treating them as hymns to progress. Even in digital art and virtual reality, his visions find new expression as creators imagine the worlds he described. This artistic engagement keeps him alive in imagination, ensuring that he remains not only a historical figure, but a living presence in culture. In philosophy, his cosmism offers a rare optimism. At a time when many voices warn of decline, he insisted on ascent. At a time when many fear technology, he celebrated it. At a time when many doubt the future, he declared it infinite. His optimism was not shallow, but grounded in conviction. He had suffered enough to know despair, yet he chose hope. This choice gives his voice unusual power. It is not the optimism of privilege, but the optimism of defiance, forged in poverty, ridicule, and silence. This defiant optimism resonates today, offering courage in an age of uncertainty. It reminds us that hope is not naive, but necessary, that imagination is not luxury, but survival, that vision is not optional, but essential. In this, his cosmism is more than philosophy. It is therapy for a species struggling with its future. As humanity prepares for Mars missions, for lunar bases, for interstellar probes, his presence feels palpable. Engineers cite his work, philosophers his vision, artists his imagery, educators his story. Each new generation rediscovers him, not as relic, but as guide. He becomes, in effect, an eternal contemporary, always speaking to the present because his horizon was always the future. His writings endure because they address not only his century, but the centuries to come. They remind us that humanity is not confined to the limits of its moment, that imagination can leap across time, that vision can reach into eternity. In this sense, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky remains alive, not in body, but in influence, not in circumstance, but in spirit, not in history, but in destiny. The longer humanity contemplates its future beyond Earth, the more Tsiolkovsky's voice seems to rise from the past, resonant and insistent. He stands not merely as a historical figure, but as a compass pointing toward inevitability. His life reminds us that the most important revolutions often begin quietly, in obscurity, without fanfare or support. His manuscripts, once ignored and ridiculed, are now regarded as milestones in intellectual history. His name, once unknown beyond provincial Russia, is now inscribed on the moon. This transformation from obscurity to universality testifies to the enduring power of vision, the way truth outlives ridicule, the way imagination survives neglect. His presence in the scientific community remains profound. Every aerospace engineering course introduces students to the rocket equation that bears his name. Every mission design considers mass ratios, exhaust velocities, and staging all principles he articulated. Space agencies across the world, regardless of ideology or geography, rely on his insight. The European Space Agency, NASA, Roscosmos, CNSA, ISRO, all operate within the framework he provided. The fact that his mathematics underpins rockets launched from continents he never saw reflects the universality of his thought. The trajectory of a satellite launched in the 21st century still traces back to equations written in Kaluga in the 19th. Few lives can claim such continuity across centuries, few thinkers such relevance to every launch. Yet his importance cannot be reduced to mathematics alone. If his equation had been his only legacy, he might be remembered narrowly as a technical pioneer. What makes him monumental is the philosophy that enveloped his calculations. He saw rockets not merely as machines, but as instruments of destiny. He believed that space exploration was not only possible, but necessary. He insisted that humanity must expand to survive. He argued that life itself demanded spread, that intelligence was the cosmos awakening to itself, that evolution pointed inevitably outward. These convictions elevated his work beyond the technical, situating it in a cosmic narrative. In this, he differs from most scientists, who often limit themselves to the immediate. Tsiolkovsky leapt to millennia, to galaxies, to futures beyond imagination. This scope ensures that he remains relevant not only to engineers but to philosophers, futurists, and dreamers. The symbolism of his life continues to grow. Statues across Russia depict him in contemplative posture, gazing toward the heavens, hand raised as though guiding humanity upward. His quotations are carved into walls of museums, inscribed in books, printed on posters. His story is told in documentaries, in classrooms, in speeches. Each retelling adds to the myth, the provincial teacher who conquered the stars with imagination alone. This myth is powerful because it captures an archetype, the solitary visionary, mocked and neglected, whose ideas transform the world. Humanity craves such archetypes, for they remind us that greatness is possible even in obscurity. They reassure us that vision matters, that imagination can alter destiny, that ridicule is not the final word. Internationally, he is increasingly regarded as a global figure. Scholars in the United States, Europe, and Asia study his writings, compare him to contemporaries like Goddard and Oberth, and recognize his unique breadth. Conferences on astronautics often dedicate sessions to his legacy. His works are translated into multiple languages, ensuring that new generations encounter him directly. His influence transcends political divides, whether in Moscow or Houston, in Beijing or Paris. His equation governs trajectories. This universality underscores his place in history not as a national hero alone, but as a human visionary. He belongs to all who seek the stars, to all who imagine futures beyond Earth. In philosophy, his cosmism continues to inspire debates about humanity's purpose. His belief that intelligence is the universe becoming conscious of itself resonates with modern cosmology and neuroscience. His prediction that humanity would evolve into higher forms anticipates debates about posthumanism and artificial intelligence. His conviction that immortality may be achieved through science parallels research in life extension and digital consciousness. Some critics dismiss these as speculative, yet others see in them the seeds of futures already unfolding. His writings serve as reminders that science and imagination must walk together, that vision is as important as data, that destiny requires both calculation and conviction. Educationally, his story continues to be a touchstone. Teachers present him as proof that perseverance can overcome adversity, that isolation can produce genius, that poverty does not preclude greatness. Students encountering his biography often feel encouraged. If a deaf child in provincial Russia could shape the future of humanity, then their own circumstances need not define their potential. His life becomes a mirror for ambition, a parable of resilience. In this sense, his greatest lesson may not be about rockets, but about courage. The courage to dream when others mock, the courage to calculate when others ignore, the courage to persist when others despair. In art, his influence persists. Visual artists depict him with cosmic backdrops, merging his figure with galaxies. Writers invoke his words as epigraphs for stories about space. Filmmakers include his quotations in documentaries about the space age. Composers set his lines to music, treating them as hymns of progress. Even digital media, in animations and virtual reality, resurrect his visions. His imagery stations spinning in orbit, colonies thriving in space, rockets rising from Earth, has become part of the shared iconography of humanity's future. In this way, he remains not only a figure of history, but a living presence in culture. Spiritually, his legacy offers hope. In a world often divided by conflict and shadowed by crisis, his optimism is a beacon. He believed in progress not because life was easy, but because he endured hardship. He believed in survival not because he ignored danger, but because he recognized vulnerability. He believed in destiny not because he was naive, but because he saw possibility. His optimism is not shallow but forged, not accidental but chosen. It resonates because it demonstrates that hope can be defiance, that vision can be resilience, that imagination can be survival. In an age where despair tempts many, his voice offers courage. The stars are not only reachable, but inevitable. And as humanity stands on the threshold of new journeys to Mars, to asteroids, to deeper space, his presence feels immediate. Engineers consult his equation. Philosophers cite his cosmism. Artists depict his visions. Teachers tell his story. He lives in the plans, in the dreams, in the aspirations. He lives in every rocket launch, every satellite orbit, every probe journey. He lives in humanity's imagination of the cosmos. In this sense, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky has never truly left. His voice endures, his hand still points skyward, his presence still guides. He is not only past but present, not only memory but compass, not only history but destiny. The further humanity ventures into the 21st century, the more Tsiolkovsky seems less like a figure of the past and more like a contemporary voice. His insistence that the Earth is the cradle of humanity resonates each time an astronaut looks back upon the fragile blue sphere and speaks of its beauty and vulnerability. His rocket equation operates silently behind every launch, as fundamental to astronautics as Newton's laws are to classical mechanics. His concept of orbital habitats remains the blueprint for those who dream of permanent human presence in space. His cosmism, once considered eccentric philosophy, now feels like a framework for debates about transhumanism, artificial intelligence, and humanity's ultimate destiny. In this way, Tsiolkovsky remains woven into the very fabric of present thought, his ideas both inherited and renewed. One of the most striking aspects of his influence is the way it connects technical realities with philosophical imperatives. Engineers often work with immediate problems: how to optimize fuel, how to reduce mass, how to sustain life in orbit. Philosophers often work with abstract questions: what is humanity's place in the universe? What does survival mean? What constitutes destiny? Tsiolkovsky bridged these two worlds. He did the calculations of the engineer while speaking the language of the philosopher. He grounded his cosmic visions in mathematics while elevating his equations with cosmic meaning. This integration is why his writings still appeal to multiple audiences. They satisfy the scientist, inspire the artist, and provoke the philosopher. Few figures manage such breadth, and fewer still achieve it in isolation, without institutions, without laboratories, without recognition. His achievement lies not only in what he wrote, but in the conditions under which he wrote it. As global conversations about climate change, ecological fragility, and existential risk intensify, his words gain new weight. He argued that life confined to one planet was doomed to eventual extinction, whether by natural catastrophe or human folly. Today, scientists warn of asteroid impacts, supervolcanoes, pandemics, and nuclear war. His warnings, once dismissed as speculative, now align with empirical risk assessments. He insisted that humanity must spread to survive. Modern thinkers echo him in arguing that colonization of Mars, lunar bases, and orbital habitats are necessary insurance policies. His philosophy of survival has become part of strategic planning. Space exploration is no longer framed merely as adventure, but as necessity, and in this framing, his voice is audible. He becomes a partner in modern policy, not merely a poet of cosmic dreams. In education, his story continues to shape young minds. Teachers present him as proof that adversity need not limit achievement. His deafness becomes a lesson in resilience, his poverty a lesson in perseverance, his ridicule a lesson in courage. Students learn that greatness can emerge from unlikely places, that imagination can overcome neglect, that persistence can outlast ridicule. In this way, his life functions as moral pedagogy. It teaches not only about rockets, but about character, not only about equations, but about courage. His biography is as important as his mathematics, for it shows that ideas can survive silence, that vision can survive scorn, that imagination can survive poverty. He becomes a role model not only for scientists, but for anyone facing adversity. His life says, persist, for truth will outlast neglect. Artists, too, continue to draw from his imagery. Sculptures depict him pointing skyward, murals show him surrounded by rockets, films reference his quotations, novels quote his lines. His presence in art ensures that he remains part of popular imagination. He is not confined to technical circles, but circulates in culture. His image has become a shorthand for vision, for aspiration, for cosmic destiny. The man who once lived in obscurity is now immortalized in art, his face recognizable, his quotations familiar, his story retold. In this sense, he has become both symbol and myth, an archetype of the visionary whose life was defined by adversity, but whose imagination triumphed. This cultural afterlife reinforces his universality, ensuring that he remains alive in memory as long as humanity dreams of the stars. Philosophically, his cosmism has become more relevant with the rise of transhumanism and debates about the future of consciousness. He speculated about humanity evolving into higher forms, perhaps even into beings of energy or consciousness. Modern thinkers debate artificial intelligence, brain-computer interfaces, genetic engineering, and the possibility of uploading consciousness. In these debates, his writings are cited as early anticipation. He imagined humanity not fixed but transforming, not limited but transcending. His optimism about immortality through science resonates with those who see technology as a path to extending life. His insistence that evolution continues beyond biology aligns with contemporary post-humanist thought. He becomes a bridge between past speculation and present debate, his voice echoing in discussions far beyond his century. In the global scientific community, his recognition continues to grow. Journals publish analyses of his works, conferences celebrate his anniversaries, scholars compare his ideas to those of Goddard and Oberth. Increasingly, he is regarded not only as the father of astronautics, but as one of the great thinkers of human destiny. His integration of science and philosophy places him alongside figures like Newton and Darwin, whose work redefined humanity's place in the cosmos. Newton showed that the heavens obeyed natural law. Darwin showed that humanity was part of evolution. Tsiolkovsky showed that humanity's evolution must continue beyond Earth. In this lineage, he is not a minor provincial, but a major global figure. His legacy is not only Russian, but universal, not only scientific, but civilizational. Culturally, his myth continues to inspire. The deaf boy who educated himself, the provincial teacher who wrote of space, the ridiculed visionary who became immortal, this story resonates because it reflects the eternal struggle of humanity between limitation and aspiration. His life says that imagination can triumph over circumstance, that vision can outlast ridicule, that perseverance can carve pathways to the stars. His myth is not false, but distilled, not invented, but sharpened, not fiction, but symbolic truth. It is retold because it embodies the essence of human striving. In this sense, Tsiolkovsky has become more than man. He has become symbol, myth, archetype. He embodies the eternal pattern of humanity reaching beyond itself. And as humanity prepares for its next steps to Mars, to asteroids, to deeper space, his presence remains. Engineers calculate with his equation, philosophers debate with his cosmism, artists depict his visions, teachers tell his story. He remains contemporary because his horizon was always future. His words still challenge, his story still inspires, his ideas still guide. The deaf school teacher from Kaluga remains a living voice in humanity's imagination, whispering that the cradle must be left, that the stars await, that destiny is cosmic. His immortality is not mystical, but practical, not fantasy, but reality, not mere memory, but continuing influence. In this sense, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky is not only history, but destiny, not only past, but compass, not only man, but symbol of humanity's eternal ascent. The longer humanity persists in reaching for the stars, the clearer it becomes that Konstantin Tsiolkovsky was not simply an eccentric dreamer, but a cartographer of the future. Each new milestone in space exploration feels like a footstep along the trail he blazed with pen and paper. When the International Space Station circles Earth, one sees the realization of his concept of permanent habitats in orbit. When rovers traverse the surface of Mars, one hears echoes of his belief that humanity must extend life beyond Earth. When telescopes capture images of galaxies billions of light years away, one recalls his insistence that human destiny is cosmic. His words, written in obscurity, now function as commentary on achievements realized long after his death. He becomes less a prophet of the past and more a voice embedded in the present, a thinker whose visions continue to unfold with each decade. His influence persists not only in achievements, but in aspirations, plans for colonies on Mars, for mining asteroids, for sending probes to other star systems all rest upon principles he articulated. His rocket equation governs propulsion. His diagrams inspire habitat designs. His philosophy justifies expansion. These connections remind us that exploration is not sudden invention, but cumulative fulfillment. Tsiolkovsky provided the intellectual soil in which later projects germinated. Without his synthesis of calculation and vision, humanity might still view spaceflight as mere fantasy. He demonstrated that it was not fantasy but inevitability, not dream but destiny. This shift in perception was as crucial as any engine test or rocket launch. Ideas precede actions, and in Tsiolkovsky's case, the ideas shaped the very framework of human ascent. The symbolic power of his life story also continues to grow. He represents the archetype of the solitary visionary, the figure who endures ridicule yet persists, who suffers neglect yet prevails, who lives in poverty yet reshapes destiny. This archetype resonates because it mirrors the universal human experience of struggle. His story becomes a parable, that genius may be unrecognized, that truth may be mocked, that vision may be ignored, but that persistence can outlast all obstacles. This parable is told in classrooms, in documentaries, in books, in speeches. It inspires not only scientists, but all who feel marginalized or dismissed. He becomes a voice of encouragement across time. Do not despair if your ideas are ridiculed, for ridicule may be the prelude to recognition. In this moral dimension, his life extends beyond science into universal human relevance. Globally, his recognition reflects his universality. Russian institutions preserve his legacy with museums and statues, but international space agencies honor him in conferences and publications. The crater on the moon that bears his name serves as silent monument. Streets and schools carry his name across continents. His presence in global culture affirms that the cosmos belongs to all, that the vision of space exploration transcends borders. This universality echoes his own philosophy, that humanity is not confined to nations, but belongs to the cosmos. His life, rooted in provincial Russia, has become global heritage. His vision, born in obscurity, has become universal aspiration. In this sense, he is not only Russian but human, not only provincial but cosmic. Philosophically, his cosmism remains fertile ground. His conviction that intelligence is the universe becoming self-aware resonates with modern cosmology. His insistence that evolution continues beyond biology resonates with transhumanism. His optimism about immortality through science resonates with contemporary life extension research. His belief that humanity must expand resonates with existential risk assessments. These resonances ensure that his voice is not silenced by time. Instead, it continues to shape debates about the long-term future of life. He becomes a dialogue partner for modern thinkers, a voice from the past that still speaks to present dilemmas. His writings function like seeds, germinating in contexts he never imagined, but shaping futures nonetheless. Artists also sustain his legacy. Films portray him as visionary. Novels quote his lines. Artworks depict his imagery. His quotations circulate as aphorisms. His face appears on murals, his name on institutions. This artistic afterlife ensures that he remains present in imagination, not only as technical figure but as cultural icon. He inspires creativity across disciplines, reminding artists that imagination is as crucial as engineering in shaping the future. His visions provide motifs for stories, his life provides archetypes for characters, his quotations provide epigraphs for works of art. In this sense, he continues to inspire not only the calculation of engineers, but the creativity of dreamers. In education, his biography continues to serve as inspiration. Teachers emphasize his resilience, his self-education, his perseverance. Students learn that he overcame deafness, poverty, and ridicule to articulate visions that changed the world. This lesson resonates universally, that circumstances need not limit potential, that perseverance can outlast neglect, that vision can triumph over adversity. His story becomes a moral curriculum, teaching not only science but courage. It encourages students to dream, to persist, to imagine beyond limits. In this role, his legacy may be as important as his equations. He teaches not only the mechanics of rockets, but the resilience of spirit. As humanity contemplates its long-term future, his voice becomes increasingly urgent. Scientists discuss terraforming Mars, building orbital colonies, harnessing asteroids, traveling to nearby stars. Philosophers debate the ethics of colonization, the survival of consciousness, the meaning of destiny. Futurists speculate about posthuman evolution, digital immortality, and cosmic intelligence. In each of these debates, Tsiolkovsky's writings provide precedent. He did not provide answers to every question, but he framed the horizon in which such questions arise. He taught humanity to think in millennia, not decades, to imagine futures beyond immediate survival. His voice is a reminder that destiny is not limited to the present moment, that imagination must leap across centuries, that humanity's story is cosmic in scale. In the end, the story of Konstantin Tsiolkovsky is the story of vision outlasting ridicule, of perseverance transcending obscurity, of imagination proving stronger than mockery. He was born in silence, struck deaf in childhood, condemned to a life that seemed destined for invisibility. He lived in poverty, patched shoes for his children, taught in provincial classrooms, and scribbled equations that few cared to read. His contemporaries laughed at his talk of spaceflight, dismissed his ideas as absurd, treated his dreams as delusion, yet history would reverse the laughter. Every rocket launched, every satellite orbiting Earth, every astronaut gazing down on the blue planet has become his vindication. The mockery of his age has become the foundation of ours. The cradle of humanity has truly been left, and the equations that govern our ascent are his. His contributions cannot be reduced to mathematics alone. He gave humanity not just the rocket equation, but the courage to see itself as more than earthbound. He offered a philosophy of destiny that united science and imagination, insisting that survival demanded expansion, and that expansion promised transcendence. He taught that poverty need not silence genius, that ridicule need not bury truth, that isolation need not extinguish vision. His life reminds us that greatness can emerge from the most unlikely of places, that the future is often written first by those ignored in their time. And yet, his story does not end with vindication. It continues, unfinished, unfolding with every new step into the cosmos. Each Mars mission, each orbital station, each probe launched beyond the solar system is a chapter in the book he began. His hand still points skyward, urging us to continue, to imagine further, to persist against doubt. The ridicule of yesterday has been refuted, but the destiny of tomorrow remains unwritten. The open question is left for us. Will humanity fulfill the vision he articulated? Will we become the cosmic species he foresaw, or will we falter, confined once more to the cradle he warned against? The answer lies not in his life, but in ours. Tsiolkovsky gave us the map. The journey is ours to complete.